School is in. But are you really ready to learn? Open your eyes to a new day in education with the Awakening Educator, a program specifically designed to explore a new, mindful way of educating our youth. Learn about social-emotional learning, new modalities of teaching, and the most relevant topics in education with your hosts, Susan Andrian and Megan Sweet. Susan and Megan will take you inside the issues by looking at them from different points of view, from policies and research to teaching models that are actually used in schools. There's never a dull moment in this classroom. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share, and share your thoughts live on air. Grab a pen and paper and get ready to open your textbooks and minds to a new way of learning on the Awakening Educator.
Welcome, everybody, to the Awakening Network. My name is Megan Sweet.
This is the Awakening Educator
on
Contact Talk Radio. That's all right. We're all good.
The Awakening Network. That's
the
good.
Awakening Network.
That's all right.
Just have to awaken Megan.
Yeah,
Yes,
we have to awaken Megan.
exactly.
Megan's been up for many hours already.
This is the Awakening Educator, and I'm Susan Andrian.
I think my name's Megan Sweet. And our guest today is Delaine Eastin, who's a former state superintendent of public instruction in California. And today's the beginning of a 3-part series on food in education and the vital role it plays in helping to support our kids. Often it's kind of an underlooked element of schooling, and we're going to dive into it in 3-part series. But I want to start by introducing you a bit to Delaine. So I'm going to talk a little bit. First and foremost, well, she's a lot of things. To me, she's a very special human being. So I'm very grateful for Delaine joining us today. I became aware of her when she's a state superintendent of public instruction, and actually she visited my classroom, which I like to remind her about all the time when she visited my school, back when I was a very young, feisty, and not easily impressed teacher. And Delaine won me over instantly with her, she's real. And she's not a politician. She tells the truth. She's passionate for real about kids and families. And that's going to come through today. But I'll read her formal introduction because that's what I'm supposed to do. But I just wanted to say that for me, this is a personal treat to have Delaine with us today. So as the first and only woman elected to the state superintendent of public instruction for the state of California, Delaine has administered a department of more than 3,300 people and was responsible for more than 40% of the state's budget. She served as regent for the University of California and a trustee of the California state system. Prior to her election to 2 terms as state superintendent of public instruction, she served 4 terms in the California State Assembly, where she chaired the Education Committee, and prior to that, the Consumer Protection and Governmental Efficiency Committee. After 2 terms as state superintendent, she was the first executive director of the National Institute for School Leadership. Subsequently, she was a distinguished visiting professor of educational leadership at Mills College, where she also directed the Center for Civic Engagement and Women's Leadership. While state superintendent, Eastin led the 1995 Gardens in Every School initiative, Assembly Bill 1535, whose purpose was to create opportunities for schools to provide dynamic environments that support student mastery of educational standards. Students who participate in school garden projects not only discover fresh food and make healthier food choices, but they also develop a deeper understanding and appreciation for the environment, the community, and each other. In addition to all the many accolades that Delaine has gotten over the years, and there are many, there's an elementary school in Union City named after her, as well as a child development center in Fremont and an art gallery in Healdsburg High School. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to have you with us today, Delaine. So thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much. What an incredible career and powerful impact that you've had on children and families in California.
Yeah.
Really honored to be with you today.
Yeah. So we're going to just jump right in, and I'm just wondering what got you interested in public education to begin with, Delaine. Why state superintendent of all of your options?
There's insanity in my family. How about that? I was blessed to have a couple of really terrific parents who valued education. And my dad was accepted at college. He actually applied, but it was the Great Depression. House burned down and his father went bankrupt, and so he joined the Navy, and he never got to go to college. And my mother was also a child of the Depression. She didn't go to college either. So, although a lot of women didn't in those days, I'll be honest with you. But anyway, they wound up meeting, and the odd couple, he was from Kentucky, big old hillbilly, and she was from San Francisco, elegant fashion person. And they wound up having one of those unlikely, wonderful love affairs that resulted in a long marriage. And they had 2 kids. And we moved a few times because my dad was in the Navy, but he got his 22 years in at the end of the Korean War. He left, and they bought their first and only house, and they bought it in the best school district they could afford. Could have bought a bigger house for less money, but they bought the little house that cost more. And I went from a classroom of 44 to a classroom where I was the 20th kid in the 2nd grade. And thereby hangs the tale. It was that both teachers were excellent. But the woman that had 44 kids was at such a disadvantage in this world. And the woman who had 20 kids was able to really advance us so much further. So one of my biggest initiatives was K-3 class size reduction to 20 to 1 or less. It's since been changed, but at that time it was a big deal because we then, as now, had the biggest class size in America. And just recently, a woman stopped me on the street and said, "You don't know me, but you added 8 years to my teaching career." I went from a classroom of 34 children to a classroom of 20. And I told my husband, I'm going to teach 1 more year and then I'm done, because I just can't reach all those kids. I don't even know all their names after a week. And because the next year she had 20, she stayed 8 more years. And so I really, that's just a small part, really. It's glamorous, but it's all about the kids for me. And I'm here today because I've had a wonderful life, because I had a wonderful education, because my parents sacrificed to make sure I did that. And I'll just tell you, when I left to go to college, even then, a lot of women didn't go to college. The sons went, the brothers went, but the daughters, the sisters were left home. So only 2 of my high school friends and I went to college, and the rest went to work. And I just thank God every day. And I really do believe I have had a great life because I had this amazing education. But when I was accepted at UC Davis, a lot of people don't realize this. When they wrote the College Student Loan Act, they said girls couldn't borrow money until they were 21, boys could borrow at 18. So the men could borrow on a 4% loan, not pay any of it back till 9 months after they graduated, and buy and rent and borrow at a 4% interest rate. My parents had to borrow the money at a 7.5% interest rate, pay it back in 3 years. So they were paying twice their house payment on my loans. They didn't have any money because my dad had been on strike that year, so they used the money to make house payments that they'd saved. And even though it was cheaper to go to school then, it was still really hard for working class kids to live away from home and to buy those books. They were always expensive. And so because my parents were generous, I got to go to UC Davis, and the first in my direct line to go to college. And I got to go to UC Santa Barbara for graduate school. And by then I was on my own. I was working 3 jobs, but I believe that I was the best I ever was as a student because I was so focused. Having said that, I want every kid to have a great education. And if you think about the Student Loan Act, that was because of Dwight David Eisenhower. And you know what caused him to do a Student Loan Act? Sputnik. Sputnik went up and he said, we got to get more kids through college. The Russians are beating us. The Soviets are beating us. And so he proposed, and there were people that said, oh, Mr. President, that's too expensive. We need to worry about the space race in the Cold War, not about education. He said, we need to worry about the space race in the Cold War, and that means we need more scientists, engineers, and teachers. And so he does the Student Loan Act. You know why we have a school lunch act? That's Truman. Because in 1946, they had a draft just as they had in 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45. But in 1946, they turned away a record number of 19-year-old young men. Why? Crooked spines and foreshortened limbs, bad eyesight, bad teeth, rickets. These were the children whose formative years had come during the Great Depression, and they were unfit for service. So if you go online and look at the National School Lunch Act, it says the health of our nation's children being a matter of national security. Congress does ordain and establish the National School Lunch Act. Betsy DeVos thinks it's frosting on the cake. It's actually there because of the defense of the nation.
Yeah.
And you need to understand that. Health,
Yeah.
nutrition, it's all important as well as learning.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, thanks for that, Delaine. Especially, I'm just struck by how we have presidents. You know, I know I've heard you say before that our budgets are a sign of our values, or a symbol of our values, and especially in this time when we have a president who's defunding public education. It's really important for us to remember that we had presidents that actually established the gateways to some of these core pieces for education.
You're spot on. I like to use 4 examples. I use student loan. I use the nutrition. I use the GI Bill of Rights. That was Roosevelt. He doubled the number of men in college because of giving them the GI Bill of Rights when they came home. And the first one I like to use is named Abe Lincoln. He signed something called the Morrill Act. He dreamed that every state would have at least one land-grant college. He didn't live to see any of it. He was dead before it really happened. But his predecessor, James Buchanan, widely thought to be the worst president in history. He's getting a lot of competition these days. But James Morrill was this wonderful legislator congressman, who believed that we ought to have a system of land-grant colleges. Because of Lincoln, every state has at least one. And you know that by names like Cornell and Duke and Texas A&M and a little school called UC Berkeley, a little school called UC Davis, all because Lincoln had a vision. And I use those 4 presidents because 2 were Democrats, 2 were Republicans. This is not about partisanship. The education of our children is about patriotism, about lifting the country up.
I love that you're bringing it to patriotism and also really rooting it in history. We started our series out with history, and we're talking about food, but it is also connected, right? That the fact that kids have healthy access to healthy meals comes from a political act and a history where we were recognizing that actually our security depended on it. And there were so many threads of what you were saying that I wanted to follow. It's hard to kind of pick which one to go to, but that story around the teacher who stayed 8 more years was really powerful to me, because watching how hard it is for our teachers and seeing what an impact it has with so many kids in the classroom, and knowing that their healthy lunch is also like that the politics of educating our kids and the way that you're bringing those together, and that it really is about what are our values and how do we live our values in our political system. And right now it feels like our politicians don't have values that represent at least what I think is important.
Yeah, that's true.
Budgets are statements of values, and I've said that for over 40 years. But when you look at the budget of a family, if they look at their kid and say, honey, you can't go to college, we need a new car, you're saying something about those people. My parents drove the 10-year-old car and sent their daughter to college, but their values were about their kids. And that whole generation, I would argue, they came out of a depression and a war, and what did they do? They not only, California was tied with New York at 5th of the 50 states in per pupil spending the year I graduated from high school. Today, we're something like 41st. We may climb, I think we may actually climb to 35th or something this year. But the bottom line is you're living in the most expensive state in the union with the highest number and percentage of poor children. You shouldn't be at the bottom. You should be at the top. And they were coming out of the Depression and war. And by the way, they threw in a little system called the University of California, a little system called the CSU system, State University system, and a little thing called the community colleges. The finest higher education system in the world was built at the same time they were making K-12 into a marvelous system. And the disinvestment in California over the last 50 years is really stunning.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, I think you probably know that I studied education, finance reform, and for my doctoral work. And the way we spend money and the way the impact of just access to opportunity and how that impacts students and families is profound. And your story is one of those, of your parents having the opportunity, but also having to make this sacrifice for it. And, food and access to just those basic needs have become a gateway and an access point. They always have been, but I see it more and more in our schools of, I didn't appreciate either when I was an administrator or a teacher, really, I'm sure I made jokes about the lunch lady and all the other things. Like, I just didn't appreciate it. But actually, when I became an administrator, I started to see how much families depended on every single bit of food, and how much the kids that we were serving at my school were dependent on food for their basic needs. And then when I left the school and I went to the school district, and I had an opportunity to work with actually one of our future guests, who's an executive director over food lunch programs, just talking to her about, like, I had also hadn't thought about it. So it's the privilege of having access to enough food myself, that when school's on vacation or even over the weekends, our kids are going hungry. And so that, like, it's not just a nice thing to have, or it's, it's not an ideal, it's not like the most ideal food, but for some families and so for some children, that's their main meal of the day, whatever they get at school. And their access to that food is absolutely crucial to their health and well-being, such as, when the food lunch programs were brought in. So I'm so glad we're having this topic. And when I thought about you or wanted to bring you in, I've also just see you as a little bit of a forerunner in understanding some of these things, because you're the state superintendent. So you understood about small class size, and you've also been this leader on understanding universal preschool, which we're not going to get to today, but I know you're a big leader in that. But then also in gardens and schools, which again, to me, like initially I was like, oh, this is a nice to have thing or whatever, like, again, we've got other priorities. But the more I stay in education, the more I connect, that access to fresh food and to the environment is so profound. So I'm just wondering, from your point of view, why did that catch your attention so many years ago, and how have you seen it grow since we've been, in the last 20 years or so since you got it started?
Well, it was a wonderful experience that I share with a lot of people. When I first initially called for a garden in every school, there were a few members of the state board that said I was distracting children from real learning. It's sort of like what they said about the arts. They didn't want that done during the school year.
Right.
After school was fine. And so my attitude was that, first, my dad was a wonderful gardener, and he had taken us out into the garden and taught us not only how to plant seeds and plants, but taught us about perimeter and area. And so it made sense to me. And I would argue that the most powerful learning on earth is hands-on learning. And the garden is a living laboratory. It's a real place to come to understand not just science and horticulture, but the history of the world is the history of agriculture. And did I mention there's a lot of math that goes into those gardens and a lot of science. And how about English? Well, I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. The reality is that much of the great literature is describing, wonderful visual impacts of things like produce and gardens and majestic scenes. At the end of the day, what I found at the schools that had gardens was the school was alive. The kids were like on fire. I've had kids grab me by the hand and drag me out to the garden to show me what they were growing. I've had so many amazing stories. Let me give you just a couple. I'm up in Del Norte County, the northernmost county on the coast in California, and these wonderful teachers telling me about how hard it was to get the Hmong parents to come to school because their English wasn't very good and they weren't well educated often. And they really didn't feel very comfortable in the classroom. It just wasn't their thing, because especially if you don't speak English.
Right.
But he got those parents out there working in a garden. And they turned that a 5-acre garden. And they turned that into a place where the children and the parents and the teachers were working together and discovering things together. I'm down in LA, in a really tough part of Los Angeles. The school is fundamentally transformed in really one of the most impoverished areas with a big gang problem. The school is fundamentally transformed because they reached out to the Latino parents and invited them to come in and help with the gardens and work with the gardens. The next thing you know, they got so many parents coming for English language lessons during the school day that they're breaking a law. They have too many people in the room. Says the capacity of the room is 30, and they've got like 50 parents with the babies on their laps learning English. And that school, they went in and built some fences to protect their gardens, but they also had the parents and kids do murals. So the graffiti stopped. And it was, now I went to Quebec after that, and that's what Quebec does all over their cities. They have no graffiti. They have students, doing beautiful artwork on the buildings, and that keeps the graffiti down. That's what we need to be thinking about, is how do we engage more of our students in the learning they're doing? And while I had people on the state board said I was distracting kids from real learning by having them dig in the dirt, what I found, we actually had some amazing people, including Alice Waters, the restaurateur in Berkeley. We had the California Association of Family Farmers stepped up. Women in Wine and Napa stepped up. The Clarksburg Women's Garden Club stepped up. Different parts of the state, it might be a club, it might be a bigger group, it might be farmers. But they not only gave us money, they gave us seeds, they gave us plants, they gave us their time. They took the kids to their farms, to see their farms, and to see what, the #1 agricultural state in the country looks like when it's out doing its job. And I just believe that it was transformative for the teachers, the educators, the parents, the kids. It also engendered a lot more respect for parents who did work agriculturally. But we also were able to make, I remember one wonderful breakthrough where the Chauncey Veach, who went on to be our National Teacher of the Year, Chauncey begged the parents not to take the kids with them when they went on the road to do their migratory farm work. Let's leave them here, make sure they don't have to keep changing schools every couple of weeks or every 3 weeks or a month. Leave them here. And when he got his national award at the White House, I was there with the several Latino children who'd come with him. And they were just over the moon, choked up with the importance of what he was to them and what he was doing. He was 20 years in the Army. He wasn't a softie. He was a tough guy.
Right.
And he had a heart as big as any you've ever seen. So I just think it's really important that we find, different children have different ways of learning. But the more opportunities we have to give them real experiential learning, I think the more powerful it is.
It's so interesting. There's so many areas that I would love to go down, and given our limited time, but one of the things that really resonated was this idea of kids playing in the dirt, right? And thinking about and you talk about this in your book about grounding and having touch with the earth so that it actually moves energy through our body in a way that is healing. And so that piece of getting kids out there, and then the excitement that it brings to education and the experience of connection with their food and the environment, but also in thinking about it from this perspective of trauma and anxiety and stress, and that digging in the dirt actually moves that energy through their body. And I know you talked about that in your book as well, but really just it resonated as I could visualize the kids out there, playing and smiling and gaining healthy energy from the earth.
I actually had when I was an administrator at an elementary school, if kids got in trouble, we would actually go, not as a punishment, but we would just go and pull weeds and work in the garden. And, at first it was like, I was trying to be efficient, right? Like I stumbled across, I'm like, well, the garden looks horrible and this kid's in trouble. Let's drag him over with me and we'll go to the garden. That was the original idea. But then I just saw the transformation that happened with the kids, because it was like we could just have a conversation. There wasn't this power dynamic of me at my desk and they were behind on the other side, and all that was gone, and just became a conversation. And out of those conversations, as we were pulling weeds and just kind of touching the earth, like the kids would start to talk about what was going on behind what was happening. And then they wanted to hang out with me in the garden when they weren't in trouble. And so there is this power of just connecting back with the earth that I think, again, we think it has to be something like we need technology, we need all these things, but actually there's some very simple touchstones that are important. So sorry, Delaine, I cut you off, but it just made me think of that story.
One of the first gardens I went to with Alice Waters was behind Justice Ertz in San Francisco. And it's an 11-acre plot, and it was run by the Corton Community Schools of San Francisco. Every county has Corton Community Schools for the kids that get in trouble, and they can't be in the regular classroom, so they're essentially locked up. But this one amazing garden back there, first Sheriff Hennessy was there, the ex-sheriff of San Diego County at the time. And he said to me, Delaine, I'm going to send you out with these 2 young men. They're in here for mugging an elderly woman for her purse. I'll keep my eye on you, don't worry. They're good. So you'll get a kick out of them. They're really very, very nimble learners. So we go out in the garden, and this one boy says to me, you know, I never liked salad. My mother served salad, but I never liked it. It always tasted like the refrigerator. She cut the brown stuff off, but it still tasted like the refrigerator. He leans over and he says, but this arugula, this is something. And I think that you're spot on. I think there's hands-on learning is very powerful, and I'm for that. But there's also something that's about cultivating plants that is that gentles you and nurturing creatures and plants, because I've been in a lot of chicken coops as well. The reality is that I went to a chicken coop one time in Elk Grove, California, and they'd had a death, and the children did an autopsy on the chicken to see why it died. And it was just fascinating how, and then after they did the autopsy, they buried the chicken. Great respect. And I think there's just so much to all of this that it is a way to engage parents who don't necessarily feel comfortable in school. It's a way to engage kids with hands-on learning. It's also a way in tough neighborhoods to change the culture around the school. I was at a school in Oakland where they had a terrible graffiti problem, and the kids started a garden and they were sharing the food with the soup kitchen, and the soup kitchen was letting the homeless know that it was partly because of the kids at this elementary school. And all of a sudden, the homeless became the defenders of that school instead of the ones who, you know, may have vandalized it previously. There was a school in San Diego where it was in a tough neighborhood. They had a lot of gang problems, and the principal was a rock star, and she decided they were going to put a different garden. And you know how a lot of the schools built in the 50s have like green space out in front, but nobody can afford the custodians to maintain them anymore. And so they just turned each one of them into a little garden, and each one had a country theme. So there was Mexico and El Salvador and the Philippines and Vietnam, and it was just amazing. And it didn't matter which kids were in which classroom. They all loved learning about the culture of that country's food. And it was, I mean, I just think to the extent that we can be more nimble and we can help these kids to see the world through different lenses. I say you save that one with art, and that one with music, and that one with the garden, and that one with, you know, a computer, and this one over here with PE. So it's all important. It's not like we want to do one of these things to the exclusion of another. It's engaging the students. And in fact, the Greeks invented the word democracy from two Greek words, demos and kratos, government by the people. But they also believed they invented the word idiot. And it meant one who does not participate in politics. But they went on to say it wasn't just politics. It could be an athletic team. It could be a musical ensemble. It could be a drama production. It was all important. Participation was important. And so not just putting kids in chairs and telling them to memorize these words and these definitions and this theorem or that formula. It's really about, you know, making education come alive. And it has many different, I was up one time in Loyalton and Likely, two very little towns in California. And in both cases, they had done things to create, also in Hayfork, they'd done things to create greenhouses so they could start the plants when the snow was still on the ground. And in one case, the 4-H helped them build it. In another case, the Explorer Scouts. So it's also a way to engage people. And, you know, in other places it would be parents, but it's a way to engage people in using their skills to do things for the children that make them have a lot more buy-in to that school.
Well, a theme that's running through everything that you're talking about to me is community, which is such a powerful and important force. And you started by talking about it with like smaller class sizes and, you know, like, so we need all these opportunities to create that community within our schools and between students and their teachers, but also between parents and between the neighborhood and the school, so that these, you know, none of us are isolated. And I think in this world today in particular, that feeling of isolation and separation from ourselves, from our planet, from one another, it's just feels like it's deepening. And so I just love the simplicity of like connecting back again and in gardens and there's actually a nonprofit organization here. I don't think they're national yet, but they might be, called Planting Justice, that brings gardens actually to prisons. So there's a garden in San Quentin, and it's they give the prisoners a skill. So when they leave prison, they can work with Planting Justice, but they also can now be gardeners in other spaces, and it's really transformed the people that work in the garden. So it's really powerful.
Yeah, there's some transitional age youth programs. I think that's also part of that, where they do similar things in training young adults who have been a part of the system, the justice system.
Yeah.
In Alameda County, the county office worked with some of the school districts to do some garden programs for kids that were in special education that had challenges like Down syndrome. But they were nurturers. They could, in fact, be gardeners, and they could find meaningful ways to contribute. And I think, on many different levels, obviously farming is a very sophisticated skill if you're going to run the farm, but there are all kinds of opportunities to engage people. And I think it's, I know one family whose daughter was engaged in that, and they just thought it was her favorite part of the day. It really felt like that wasn't even like going to school. She was learning. And I just think we have to be a lot more engaging with students. Just memorizing, why do we have to learn this stuff? Just memorizing things is not as meaningful as using information, applying information, and also developing the skills associated with cultivation and nurturing.
Yeah, that's true.
So I want to pivot a little bit because we only have a little bit more time, and there were so many questions. I mean, you're
like 5 hours with
Delaine. I know we could have you back as a regular guest. It feels like there's so much wealth of information and experience, and just thinking about some of the things Megan was saying about isolation and where we are in our social political world right now, and thinking about it's you're the only female state superintendent of instruction that we've ever had. And it's such a female-dominated field, education. I'm curious as to what that was like for you. How, obviously you're a fierce advocate and a fierce woman. And why do you think we haven't had another state superintendent
in California?
California?
Well, we'd only had 3 constitutional officers in the entire history of the state before I was elected. And we elect 8 every 4 years. So today, for the first time ever, we have 3 at one time. 3 out of 8 are women. But the bigger the state, the harder it is to elect women. So we've never had a woman governor here, or in New York, or in Illinois, or there are 11 large states. Only 3 have ever had a woman governor. So the bigger the state, the harder it is to elect women to the legislature, the harder it is to elect women as constitutional officers. The bigger the city, the harder it is to elect women as mayor. So right now, the 10 large cities in California, you have only 2 that have a woman as mayor, and that's Oakland and San Francisco. So that it's just very difficult to be elected. When I was elected to the legislature, women had the vote in California for 75 years. There'd been a total of 31 women ever elected in those 75 years, a total of 31.
Wow.
So I was on the cover of the California Journal with the other 4 members of the biggest class of women in history, 5. And it's, I do think this is only the second time we've had 30% of the legislature that's female, and I think that we will see some changes in the way money is invested and policies are made. But we need to have a lot more attention paid to the schools, because you have the largest number and percentage of poor children, largest number and percentage of English learners. California should be in the top 10, not the bottom 10 when it comes to per pupil spending. So even though I'm thrilled that the governor agreed with me to go toward full day kindergarten, and he's investing more in preschool, and still in all, the overall investment of this state is way below where it needs to be if we're really going to have the kind of opportunities that kids like me had. And that includes preschool for all. It can't just be hit or miss. Some kids get it, some don't. It can't bankrupt a family. I know one couple in San Francisco that had 2 kids in preschool. $3,400 a month is what they're paying. You know what preschool costs. And college needs to come down. When I went to UC Davis, it was still hard for working class families, but it was a fraction of what it is today. And it just adjusted for inflation. I was still paying less than $1,000 a year at the University of California in fees. And my friend who went to San Jose State was paying less than $500 a year in fees. But now I know a young woman who went 2 years to community college, 2 years to UC Berkeley, 3 years to UCLA Law. So all public institutions, her debt is $248,000.
Yep.
So we are just underinvested in education, and we need to, yes, worry about making the schools living laboratories and having good food and having good nutrition and having good healthy choices they can make. But we also need to worry about reducing class size, and because my initiative has been curtailed, and a lot of schools are over 24 again, and some of them are over 30, and so it is. Budgets are statements of values. If you looked at the budget of the state of California, I think the most important thing we do is incarcerate people. We are number one in the country for prisoner expenditure. That makes me furious.
That's a great, a sad but a really powerful statistic to end on, or that platform. So we've already reached our time, Delaine. It goes so fast.
There's so much more.
I know. I really want. Will you commit to coming back? I'm going to put you on the spot. Absolutely. On the air. Excellent.
Oh, that would make us so happy. I feel like we have so much to talk about.
Yeah, we need to bring you back and talk with you more. But yeah, so gardens in schools are incredibly powerful, and they're one modality, but you're right. We need to place the education of our children and young adults as a priority in this state and in this country. And that's and stop having it going to prisons instead. That's a really powerful ending point. So I'm so grateful you're here, Delaine. We're with Delaine Eastin, former state superintendent of public instruction for the state of California, my personal mentor and friend, and I'm deeply grateful to have you here. And you're listening to the Awakening Educator. I got it right this time.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We'll be back in 2 weeks still talking about food and food in schools, and we like food here.
Yeah. And also, if you like the show, please follow us. You can follow us and subscribe to our show on iTunes and almost any other kind of podcast streaming. Please rate us. So give us some, you could rate the show, and also tell a friend. So we'd love to get the word out. So please do all those things for us. Delaine Eastin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Honored to be with you.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Shining the light.
Thanks, Delaine.
Bye-bye.
Class is dismissed. Wasn't that fun? Susan and Megan are always happy to greet you on the next episode of The Awakening Educator. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Education is the foundation for a brighter future. Open your eyes to The Awakening Educator.